A greedy HOA was holding this beautiful fishing lake hostage, so I bought it. This is the story of how I used their own rule book and a few dusty property laws to shut down their exclusive private dock and open the lake to the whole community. Some people think owning a little slice of land next to something beautiful gives them the right to control all of it. They forget that some things are meant for everyone. I was about to give them a very expensive, very public lesson in sharing. To really get why this meant so much to me, we have to rewind about 30 years. I was a kid, maybe 8 or 9, and my grandfather had this old, beat-up aluminum boat. It wasn't much, but to me, it was a chariot. Every Saturday, before the sun burned off the morning mist, we'd be out on the water. He taught me how to bait a hook and how to cast a line so it landed with a quiet plink right next to some lily pads. He taught me patience. He taught me to respect the water. Those weren't just fishing trips. They were life lessons. It was about connecting with nature, with family, with something bigger than yourself. It was on that lake that I learned the quiet joy of watching a bobber disappear, the thrill of a fight, and the satisfaction of letting a fish go. My grandfather would always say, "This water doesn't belong to us, kid. We're just lucky enough to borrow it for a while. Treat it right, and it'll be here for everyone who comes after you." That idea stuck with me, that a lake, a river, any place of natural beauty was a shared inheritance. Years went by. I grew up, got a career, built a life. But I never lost that love for the water. I always dreamed of finding a place of my own, not to hoard it, but to share that same magic my grandfather showed me. I wanted a place where another kid could have their first catch, where a family could just spend a quiet afternoon together. And then I found it. Blackwood Lake. It was perfect. Tucked away just outside of town, it was a gem. Big enough for good fishing, small enough to feel like a secret. I'd drive by just to look at the sun setting over the water, turning it to liquid gold, and I'd think about my grandfather and that dream. I pictured a small public boat ramp, a couple of picnic tables, a simple pier where parents could teach their kids to fish. It wasn't about making money. It was a passion project. But there was a problem. A big one. The lake was controlled by the Blackwood Estates Homeowners Association, and they were not the sharing type. The Blackwood Estates HOA was one of those classic neighborhood associations drunk on its own tiny bit of power. It served about 30 expensive houses that bordered a small piece of the lake. But in their minds, bordering the lake meant they owned the lake. All of it. The first time I tried to get a closer look, I was hit with a wall of signs. Private property. No trespassing. Fishing by permit only. Residents and authorized guests. The signs were aggressive, tacked to what felt like every third tree. And then there was the dock. It was a monument to their attitude. A huge T-shaped dock made of expensive composite wood, complete with benches, flower pots, and a locked gate. It stuck out into the heart of the lake like a declaration of war. I'd see a handful of residents on it, sipping drinks, acting as if the very fish in the water were their personal property. My first move was naive, I'll admit. I figured, maybe they're just worried about conservation. So I found the HOA's ancient-looking website and sent a friendly email. I introduced myself, said I loved the lake, and mentioned my dream of helping create a small community fishing area. I even offered my own time and money for upkeep, lake cleanup days, whatever they needed. A reasonable offer from a reasonable person, right? The email I got back told me everything I needed to know. It was one curt paragraph from the HOA president, a woman I'll just call Karen. The email read, "Blackwood Lake and its amenities, including the dock, are for the exclusive use of the residents of Blackwood Estates. Public access is not, and will not be, considered. Your interest is noted and summarily dismissed. Further inquiries will be marked as spam. Summarily dismissed. The arrogance was stunning. It wasn't just a no, it was a digital door slammed in my face. Over the next few months, I saw their petty tyranny firsthand. I watched an HOA board member shoo away a father and his young son who had walked over from a nearby neighborhood. The dad tried to argue they were on a public right-of-way, but the guy just pointed at a sign and threatened to call the sheriff. The look on that little boy's face as he walked away, his fishing rod dragging in the dirt, lit a fire in me. I heard stories from others. An old man who had fished the lake for 50 years, long before the HOA existed, was now constantly harassed. Teenagers trying to swim on a hot day were chased off. They were strangling the life out of this beautiful place for everyone but themselves. My grandfather's words kept echoing in my head, and Karen's dismissive email became a challenge I couldn't ignore. They thought their rules were law. They had no idea what was coming. The tipping point came on a random afternoon at the county records office. I was bored waiting for a clerk, so I started browsing the digital parcel maps on a public computer. On a whim, I typed in the address of one of the Blackwood Estates houses. The property line popped up, a neat rectangle. And just like I thought, it stopped right at the water's edge. I clicked on the next house, and the next. Same story. Then, my curiosity running wild, I clicked on the lake itself. That's when I saw it. The lake wasn't just empty space on a map. It was its own distinct piece of property. A massive, irregularly shaped polygon with its own parcel number and ownership history. The HOA didn't own the lake. They just owned the land next to a tiny fraction of it. My heart started pounding. Who owned it? I clicked through the records. A timber company, then a failed development corporation from the 70s. And the current owner? Some out-of-state holding company that probably picked it up in a bulk deal and forgot about it. To them, Blackwood Lake was just a line item on a spreadsheet. A crazy, beautiful idea started to form. The HOA was acting like kings of a castle they didn't even own. They built their precious dock on property that wasn't theirs. Their power was a complete illusion. What if someone just bought the lake? The thought was so nuts I almost laughed out loud. Can you even buy a lake? Well, it turns out, in some very specific, very rare cases, you can. If it's a privately owned parcel, like this one was, it can be bought and sold just like any other piece of real estate. The HOA's entire kingdom rested on a piece of property they didn't control. I frantically scribbled down the parcel number and the holding company's name. My hands were shaking with adrenaline. They had kicked out kids and old men. They had locked up a piece of nature. But they forgot to check the deed. And I had a feeling that was going to be a very expensive mistake. The next few months were my crash course in how to be a legal ninja. This was about justice now. My first move was to dig into water access laws. Now, these laws are incredibly complex and different in every state, so don't take this as legal advice. But in my state, I stumbled onto something called the public trust doctrine. It's a principle that says certain natural resources, like navigable waterways, are held in trust by the state for the public. And navigable could mean anything that can float a canoe. Blackwood Lake was definitely big enough for a canoe. This was my ace in the hole. Next came the purchase. This was the delicate part. I couldn't just call the holding company and announce my plan. They'd smell money and jack up the price. Or worse, call the HOA. Secrecy was everything. I hired a good real estate attorney and we set up an anonymous LLC, let's call it Watershed Holdings, to shield my identity. My broker made the call, framing it as a simple cleanup of their portfolio. The company barely remembered they owned it, which was exactly what I'd hoped for. The negotiation was a slow, careful dance. We started with a lowball offer. They countered. We went back and forth. Every email was tense. I was terrified they'd do a quick Google search, find the HOA's website bragging about their private lake, and my cover would be blown. We did our due diligence. A surveyor discreetly confirmed the boundaries and that the HOA's dock was built entirely on the lake parcel. They were trespassing. We did a deep title search, looking for any hidden traps, easements, covenants, anything that would give the HOA a legal claim. We found nothing. Zilch. Nada. Their entire empire was built on a bluff. Finally, we agreed on a price. It was a lot of money, more than I'd ever spent on anything but my house. But for this, it felt like a bargain. The closing was done remotely. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, I got an email from my lawyer. Attached was a PDF of the recorded deed. Watershed Holdings, LLC, my little ghost company, was now the official, undisputed owner of Blackwood Lake. I stared at the document on my screen. I owned the water, the fish, and the land under the HOA's ridiculous dock. They were still on it, totally oblivious that their landlord had just changed. Now that I held all the cards, it was time to plan the big reveal. My lawyer and I drafted a formal legal notice. It stated that Watershed Holdings LLC was the new owner, and that their dock was an unauthorized encroachment on private property. It cited my state's definition of navigable waters, asserting the public's right to access. And it gave them a deadline, 30 days to remove the dock. If they didn't, we'd remove it for them and send them the bill. I also ordered new signs, simple, friendly signs. Welcome to Blackwood Lake, a community fishing area. Public access, welcome. The trap was set. All I had to do was spring it. I chose a Saturday morning for the takedown. I wanted an audience. I got to the lake around 10 a.m. It was a beautiful day, and sure enough, a few residents were on their dock. I saw Karen, the HOA president, holding court on a bench. Perfect. I parked, took a deep breath, and got to work. I started by ripping down their biggest private property sign. In its place, I hammered in my own. Welcome to Blackwood Lake. I worked my way down the shore, replacing every one of their angry signs with my welcoming ones. It didn't take long for them to notice. The chatter on the dock stopped. I could feel their eyes on me. Finally, as I was hammering in the last sign near the dock's entrance, Karen marched toward me, flanked by 2 other board members. "Excuse me," she snapped. "What do you think you're doing? That is HOA property." I finished with one last, satisfying thwack and turned to her with a pleasant smile. "Good morning. Actually, I believe you're mistaken. I am the president of this HOA," she announced. "You are trespassing and vandalizing our signs. Leave now, or I'm calling the police." "Great idea," I said cheerfully. "You should definitely call them. It'll save me a step." Her face twisted in confusion. She expected me to run. "Let me be clear," she said, stepping closer. "This lake is for the exclusive use of our residents. You have no right to be here." "This is where you're wrong," I said, reaching into my folder. "You're right that this is private property. You're just wrong about who owns it." I handed her the first page of the deed. I watched her eyes scan the legal jargon, the parcel number, and the new owner's name, Watershed Holdings, LLC. I saw the exact moment it clicked. Her face went from red to a blotchy white. This is a forgery," she stammered. "I assure you, it's real," I said, pulling out the second document. "And this is for you." I handed her the legal notice. She read the first few lines, her eyes widening in horror. I could see her lips moving as she read the words. Unauthorized structure. Encroachment. 30 days to remove. You can't do this, she whispered. I can, and I have, I stated. You've built this dock on property you don't own. For years, you've illegally restricted access to what is, by state law, a public recreational waterway. Your little club is over. As the owner, I'm revoking any permission you thought you had. This dock is trespassing. You have 30 days to get it out of here. If you don't, I will. And I'll send your HOA the bill. One of her sidekicks found his voice. We'll sue you. We have riparian rights. I almost laughed. Riparian rights give you access to the water. They don't let you build on land you don't own or block the public. In fact, thanks to the public trust doctrine, the public's right to recreation here is legally superior to your private rights. I've done my homework. Have you? They were speechless. The queen had been deposed. Her castle was a sandcastle on someone else's beach. I gave Karen one last smile. Welcome to the community, I said. It's for everyone now. And with that, I walked back to my truck, leaving them standing in stunned silence. The 30 days came and went. In that time, the HOA's lawyer sent a blustering letter full of threats. My lawyer promptly shut it down with a simple response that included a copy of the survey and a list of relevant case law. Now, this could have easily turned into a long, drawn-out court battle. But, in this case, they had no legal leg to stand on, and they knew it. Their power was a bluff, and I had called it. On day 31, I called a local demolition crew. The removal of the dock was a spectacle. A small crowd from the neighborhood gathered to watch. A crew on a barge with a crane dismantled the HOA's monument to exclusivity, piece by piece. The sound of saws and wrenches was the best sound I'd ever heard. When the last piling was pulled from the lake bed, a spontaneous cheer went up from the crowd. The lake looked like it could finally breathe again. The demolition invoice, as promised, was sent directly to the Blackwood Estates HOA. I hear the special assessment to cover it wasn't very popular. In the weeks that followed, the change was amazing. I put in a simple gravel boat ramp for canoes and kayaks, a couple of picnic tables, and some trash cans. It wasn't fancy, but it was open. And people came. The father and son I'd seen chased away were some of the first. I saw the old man who'd been harassed, now sitting peacefully in his chair, his line in the water. Families had picnics. Kayakers paddled across the water. The lake was alive with the happy, relaxed sounds of a community. I even organized a Welcome to the Lake fishing day and bought a bunch of cheap rods and reels for kids. Hundreds of people showed up. It was everything I had dreamed of. Everything my grandfather would have wanted. The best part? Some of the regular families from Blackwood Estates started coming down too. Not the board members, of course, but once the walls came down, they were just people who wanted to enjoy the lake, like everyone else. The fight wasn't against them, it was against the small, power-hungry group that convinced them exclusion was a good thing. Looking at the lake today, it's hard to believe it was ever a private fortress. It's a real community spot now. And it all happened because an HOA thought they owned something they didn't, and they pushed one person a little too far. When you boil it all down, this was never just about a lake. It's about standing up to bullies, whether they're on a playground or an HOA board. It's about knowing your rights and doing the homework. And it proves the idea my grandfather taught me in that old boat. The most beautiful things in this world aren't meant to be hoarded by a few. They're a shared inheritance that belongs to all of us. Sometimes, you just have to be willing to stand up and fight for it. By taking back this lake, we didn't just open up a piece of water. We reaffirmed a principle. And seeing the joy it brings to people now, I can tell you, it was worth every penny. So, that's my story. It was a long and stressful fight, but I wouldn't trade the outcome for anything. It makes me wonder how many other private spots are being held hostage by groups who are just bluffing. What do you think? Have you ever had a run-in with a power-hungry HOA? What would you have done? Let me know your stories in the comments. And if you enjoyed this and believe in the fight for public access, hit that like button and subscribe. Because sometimes, the biggest bullies just need to be reminded who really holds the power.